A young perspective on hot-button issues around the world. This is The Hub.
This year marks the 80th session of the UN General Assembly, a time to reflect on 8 decades of peace, development, and human rights. But the world also faces urgent challenges, especially climate change, which calls for stronger global cooperation. At this crossroads, Chinese President Xi Jinping has put forward the Global Governance Initiative, or GGI, urging countries to work together for a fairer and more equitable global governance system. How can the GGI best align with the UN Sustainable Development Goals? And what added value can it bring to global climate action and today's international efforts? To discuss on this, we're joined by Mr. Selwyn Charles Hart, Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General on Climate Action and Just Transition. Selwyn, great to have you with us. We're having a very important meeting, that is the UNGA, happening at a crucial moment in time. Recently, we've had the honor of interviewing Secretary General Guterres during his visit to the SCO in Tianjin. When I asked him about our climate commitment, our goal of reaching 1.5 degree Celsius, he said we're far off track right now, but it is still salvageable. It can still be managed if countries take actions. What do you think he means exactly by that?
The 1.5 degree goal is a long-term goal. And science tells us that we need to act urgently to keep this long-term goal within reach. The reality is that the solutions are readily available. This year also marks the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. And when we reflect on how far we've come over the course of the last 10 years, there's a lot that the world and the international community should be proud of. For example, and I'll give a couple examples, solar and wind. The cost of solar and wind have fallen dramatically over the course of the last 10 years. The deployment of renewables has skyrocketed by over 250, close to 300% over the course of the last 10 years. Investments in renewables have surged. This year, the International Energy Agency estimates that the investments in clean energy technologies will be double those of fossil fuels. It is estimated that over 2.2 trillion will be invested in clean energy. So we've made tremendous strides over the course of the last 10 years. But the reality is that fossil fuels, for the most part, still dominate energy systems, despite this enormous progress. So what the Secretary General means is that we really need to use the solutions that are readily available. The next decade needs to be a decade of acceleration. We have the tools, we have the solutions, the finances there. And countries like China are leading the way and showing the rest of the world how a new clean energy economy can emerge. A clean energy economy that delinks economic growth from emissions growth. We're seeing that begin to emerge in China. It's already taken hold in some of the advanced economies, but this needs to happen all over the world. Southeast Asia, Africa, small and United States, LDCs, everyone now needs to be part of this global movement.
What do you think are the biggest hindrances and obstacles keeping us from reaching this 1.5 degree Celsius target in particular, and our climate and sustainability goals in general?
Well, for some countries, it's political will, right? We've seen significant or significant backtracking in some countries. But for others, and especially for the developing and emerging economies, it's not an absence of political will. I was just at the Africa Climate Summit in Addis, and I heard African leader after African leader speak about their strong commitment to industrialize, but industrialize in a green and sustainable way. The big challenge for developing and emerging economies is finance, fair finance. right? There's lots of finance available out there, but the problem is the cost of finance for developing and emerging economies. And the renewables revolution is a clear example of how broken the global financial architecture is. Since Paris, 4 out of every $5 invested in clean energy has gone to the advanced economies and China. The rest of the world is sadly being left behind. So the reality is just $1, 1 out of every $5 invested in clean energy since Paris was invested in countries representing two-thirds of the global population. And take Africa, for example. Africa has 60% of the world's best solar potential, 30% of the critical energy transition minerals needed for the energy transition. Yet we have a situation where 600 million people in Africa still lack access to clean energy, and Africa only attracted 2%, 2% of the global clean energy investment. And we know what the challenges are. Many of these countries lack the fiscal space to make these investments. Many of them have high levels of debt. But equally important is the high cost of capital. African countries and developing countries in general have to pay, whether it's debt or equity financing, the cost of capital in most instances is 2 to 3 times higher than it is for the advanced economy. Same technology. And the reality is that developing countries really don't, and African countries default on for the most part, on their debt. But the broken international financial architecture penalizes developing and emerging economies by imposing higher risk premiums on these economies and therefore increasing the cost of capital. So we need to find ways of reducing significantly the cost of capital. A developing country should not have to pay, 15 and 20% in terms of the cost of capital when an advanced economy of the same size is paying 2, 3, and 4%.
Yeah, exactly. It's not fair for some countries to perpetuate the debt situation for others. Do you think somehow by working with China and China's latest global governance initiative, potential could be, in those areas of the global South by working closer with China?
The role of China will be absolutely key in really supporting countries to accelerate the pace of the transition and also helping them to address some of the risk associated with the climate crisis. The reality is that China has invested in clean energy technologies and manufacturing and really has the capacity really to provide developing countries with low-cost clean energy options. And at a time when developing countries have the political will to transition, but the international financial architecture is not supportive of these transitions. And we've seen some really great examples over the course of the last few years. Take Pakistan, for example, right? The role of China in really ensuring and helping Pakistan to accelerate the pace of its transition, the rapid deployment of solar technology and battery storage in Pakistan really has been phenomenal. And if this can be replicated all over the world, including and I would say especially on the continent of Africa, where, as I said, just attracted 2% of clean energy investments, and where you have these 600 million persons who lack access to electricity. 8 out of 10 of that 600 million persons in Africa who lack access to electricity are in rural, hard-to-reach areas, right? No, you can't build a coal-fired power plant or a nuclear plant in those areas. But solar and battery storage really has the ability to connect the unconnected and provide energy access to hundreds of millions of persons who have previously been unconnected from from power in general, let alone clean power. So the role of China will be critical. And the example that China is setting, and of course, we continue to push China to move faster and to do more. But the example that China is setting in terms of developing a new development model, delinking emissions growth from economic growth and competitiveness and industrialization. This is a really important example for other countries to follow. And the final point is on early warning systems, right? We know that climate impacts are getting worse. And China was one of the first supporters of the Secretary General's early warning for all initiative. So yes, my short answer to your question is yes, the role of China will be indispensable over the course of the coming decades.
So let me ask you about the bigger picture, that is the transition that we're in. We're seeing a new world order unfolding right in front of our eyes. The post-World War II liberal world order led by the United States and its NATO allies have cracks everywhere, wherever you look, to put it mildly. Whereas the rise of the global South is considered a phenomenon to be reckoned with, the rise of China and the developing countries. And under these contexts, under these circumstances, President Xi of China proposed a global governance initiative incorporating the Chinese philosophy of having this equitable, sustainable development model marked by fraternity, equality. Can I get an assessment from you, a comment from you on this new initiative proposed by President Xi, that is the Global Governance Initiative of China?
You are right that a new global order is emerging. We're now entering into a more multipolar world. Geopolitical tensions and divisions are on the rise. But the reality is that we still face significant global threats, and these global threats require global solutions. And we also need global solidarity as well. It is a really difficult time for most of the developing world. Over 60 countries, for example, are spending more on servicing debt, on the interest payments to debt than they are spending on health and education. This is not
that is crazy. That is a big problem to get to. And it requires global action, policy coordination. And that really leads to my next question. The 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly is underway under the theme of Better Together, 80 years or more for peace, development, and human rights. What do you expect to be the deliverables? What do you want to see happening during this year's UNGA?
It is absolutely critical that despite the geopolitical tensions and divisions, that countries can come together in support of multilateralism, that countries can come together in support of international cooperation, that countries can come together in the name of global solidarity. Global threats and challenges demand global solutions. And it's absolutely critical that at this 80th anniversary of the founding of this really great organization, that there can be a strong recommitment to multilateralism and the values and purposes of the United Nations. And we need to make concrete progress in addressing some of the critical challenges that humanity faces 80 years after the founding of the United Nations. 80 years ago, no one thought about climate change. It was not seen as a major challenge. Some of the challenges that we're facing now with some of the new technologies, there needs to be a strong and firm commitment to strengthening international problem-solving institutions like the United Nations to address these threats and challenges. And we're making progress. There was recently passage of a resolution that placed the United Nations at the center of developing a set of global norms of artificial intelligence. On climate, we know that a multilateral solution is the best solution to address this crisis, but also to ensure that countries can reap the opportunities of a clean energy, climate resilient future. And this year is also the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. Most countries remain firmly committed to the Paris Agreement. Countries are working on their new climate plans. Countries are looking at how they can be part of the clean energy revolution. And countries also recognize that they have a responsibility to protect their citizens and the livelihoods of people.
You talk about this 80th anniversary of relative peace after World War II, the founding of the United Nations, and anniversary. We're honoring and memorializing, not forgetting the sacrifices of the people that went before us, the war in Europe, in the Pacific, and the Eastern battlefield where Chinese engaged the Japanese. Of course, you're a climate scientist, but from your vantage point, what do you think are the most important reflections as we mark this 80th anniversary of the founding of the UN?
It remains the only place, and the General Assembly remains the only place where every country, irrespective to their size or wealth, has an equal voice. And this has allowed the international community to address issues that, some of its smaller members have advanced, like climate change, right? And it go back to climate all the time, right? It was the smallest members of the United Nations family that first brought climate to the world's attention. Over the years, as imperfect as the multilateral response has been, it has still delivered significant progress over the course of the last 30 years. We're not there yet, by any stretch of the imagination, but it really shows the power of an organization, institution like the United Nations to really allow its smallest, its most vulnerable, sometimes its poorest members to bring to the attention of the world the issues and challenges that they are experiencing, as well as what vulnerable people and communities and even rich and powerful are experiencing. So the fact that you have this organization, you have the General Assembly where all countries have equal voice is a remarkable achievement for humanity, an achievement that we must build on.
Selvin, we all understand that some countries and administrations are not precisely keen on supporting climate causes and projects. In fact, some governments withdrew from climate initiatives and previous accords that they signed up to. How upset or worried are you about some politicians or a group of politicians leading powerful organizations or leading powerful countries in really influencing the world in looking away from climate science and climate urgency, in resorting to populism and right-wing thinking, even when the overwhelming evidence of climate science supports the fact that we are having a heating climate?
Reality is, today, only one country has ever withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. But even, in every country, we're seeing the pace of the energy transition accelerate at an unprecedented rate. In the United States, for example, this year, the US is set to install more wind, more solar, more battery storage than it's ever done in its entire history, right? And so the reality is that while a country might have left the Paris Agreement, no economy, and this is something that the Secretary General has said, no economy has left the Paris Agreement. Because the reality is what has happened over the course of the last 10 years now makes the energy transition inevitable and unstoppable and irreversible. So while we might be seeing lots of political noise and posturing on climate, we're seeing clean energy investments surge. We're seeing record deployment in every country. We're also seeing this reflected in the affordability and speed of clean energy in every corner of the world. What is most worrying, though, is um, this rise of climate denialism when we're seeing clear evidence and facts that one, this crisis is man-made, and that the increase in and the acceleration of the climate crisis, the increase in temperatures is leading to an acceleration both in the rate as well as the intensity of natural disasters. And climate denialism, it costs lives, right? It means that people are not prepared, right? If you don't believe in something, why would you prepare for it? Many people are not prepared for what is happening, and this is already. And I'll give one example. 10 years ago, the US averaged 10 to $12 billion climate disasters on an annual basis. So, say once a month, the US would experience a $1 billion weather or climate event. In 2023 and 2024, that was 28 and 27. They experienced 28 and 27 $1 billion climate events in 2023 and 2024, which is around $1 billion weather and climate disaster every 2 weeks, right? So before it was once every month, now it's once every 2 weeks. So as we see this increase in temperature, as the climate crisis accelerates, we're seeing this all over the world. We're seeing it in China, we're seeing it in Japan, we're seeing it in Africa, where there's this acceleration of the climate crisis, and we have a responsibility really to ensure that people are protected, because for every dollar invested in adaptation, the returns are massive, right? So we need to ensure that people are protected. And I see this climate denialism really as extremely dangerous, because it will lead to people, especially vulnerable people, not being protected from a worsening climate.
Finally, your expectations on COP30 to be taking place in Belém, Brazil.
Okay. COP30, it really is an important COP. It's the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. We're really working hard to get as many countries as possible to submit their new climate targets. You know, every 5 years, countries and parties to the Paris Agreement are to submit their new national climate plans. We know that countries are working really hard. They're taking this generation of NDCs, as we call them in the climate world, extremely serious. Many countries have stepped up on the quality of the NDCs. For example, China has committed to prepare a whole of economy, all greenhouse gas emission NDC for the very first time. And we're seeing many developing and emerging economies do this. But the reality is, and we know this, that the NDCs, although many of them will be a step in the right direction, they will not take us fully to where we need to be to get to this 1.5 degree goal. So COP30 really needs to respond to this in a way that is credible, that really helps us to turn the next decade into a decade of implementation, a decade of acceleration. And we know that countries can exceed their international commitments. China achieved its renewable energy target 6.5 years ahead of what it committed to 5 years ago. And we've seen this in other parts of the developing world. So we really need to work on ensuring that the enabling conditions are there. And this goes back to the point about finance. And a key deliverable at this COP is the presentation of a roadmap to the 1.3 trillion in external finance that was agreed on last year. And we also believe that there needs to be some response or endorsement of this roadmap that our Brazilian friends are currently working on. So really a strong response to the NDCs and a strong response to putting the enabling conditions, mainly finance, in place. I would see these as two of the big outcomes that we expect at COP30.
Selwyn, thank you so much for your time and your insights. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Hub on CGTN. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thanks to our distinguished guest, Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General on Climate Change and Just Transition, Mr. Selwyn Hart, and our audience as well. I will see you again next time. Bye and take care.
Tales of Chinese Children is a collection of fairy tales and fables written by Edith Eaton, one of the first Asian American women writers from the turn of the 20th century. Edith focused on children who were treasured.
They are the sweetest gift of all.
Lost.
Get away from me! Get away from me!
Or misunderstood.
My son, the evil spirit in your sister had almost lost you to me.
In the complicated adult world, and much more. Search for Books and Beyond on radio.cgtn.com and all major podcast platforms to delve into an audio journey which allows the sound to linger around and above you for stunning realism.